Exclusively on Secular Media Network, this is the Gaytheist Manifesto.
Hello and welcome to the Gaytheist Manifesto, your source for news, commentary, discussion, and debate at the intersection of the atheist movement and the LGBT rights movement. I am your host, Callie Wright, and I am joined today, as always, by my co-host, Daniel Wolfsong.
Hello, lovelies.
Today is the second in an occasional series of episodes where we lighten things up to highlight exclusively good things going on in our community. We've got some good news from all around the LGBTQ and atheist communities, including some submitted by you. So, first off, one thing that I saw that I really liked, this one was shared with me once, and I saw it a couple of times on my timeline. So, H&M, which is this big clothing line, has a label called "And Other Stories," and they have a new ad campaign that uses exclusively transgender models, and they actually used all trans photographers, stylists, and makeup artists in the process of the shoot to make sure that everything was good from the trans point of view. So I think this is really freaking cool.
Yeah, that's amazing. And this is another instance of trans visibility being an important part of the trans movement. If trans people, just similar to the gay rights movement, we can get legal rights to protect us, but culture is a much trickier aspect of that. And getting culture and society to come around is a lot more convoluted and difficult, and generally takes a lot longer. So this sort of thing that makes trans people visible, it puts them out in front of the public eye, is super important.
Well, and one thing that I think is really cool about this is that if you look at the pictures, which I'll have the link in the show notes for all the stories that we talk about today, but if you look at the stories, there's nothing sexualized about this. There's nothing sensational or anything like that. Like, this is just a new clothing line, and it's being modeled by trans people, which I think is awesome, because there's always this fine line that we have to kind of walk between. We need trans visibility, we need trans faces, in the forefront. But at the same time, the eventual goal is for trans people to be treated and seen just like everyone else, right?
Right.
So it's sort of it's sort of an interesting thing to kind of try to walk that line. One of the things that So the creative director for this company said, "The fashion world is embracing transgender models, and we think that's great. But we couldn't help to ask ourselves how the traditional fashion gaze can change if we keep the same normative crew behind the camera. So we invited 5 amazing creatives, all transgender, to make our latest story." And and again, I mean, the clothes aren't exactly my style.
Right.
But that's okay. That's not the point. But I think it's so awesome to see people being represented that respectably and that normally. And these are just models modeling clothes, and, there are trans people involved. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah. And H&M, it's pretty much a youth oriented brand, isn't it?
I believe so. Yeah.
I know they sell stuff for adults, but I think it's mostly sort of like a youth-oriented thing. And so doing this sort of campaign for a brand that's teenagers and young adults are the main demographic, to me looks like a pretty awesome step on the way to raising up an entire generation of folks who see trans people as people, as well as gay people, and not as sort of what would you say today? Like, trans people, a lot of people in today's world aren't really familiar with trans people except where they see them as sort of an anomaly in our culture.
Yeah. So, well, the idea being that, trans people are these like over the top. I think it kind of has to do with the perception of trans people and drag queens being connected to each other and being kind of the same. Or that, it's this, they're celebrities or they're dead, like that kind of thing. I was just going to say, if it's a youth-oriented brand, that makes me feel really old. Like I'm an old woman at 30 because I don't get it.
Get off my lawn.
So the next story is about this animated series called Gen Z. And this is, as far as we know, the first animated series to ever be on TV with a lead character who is trans, who is actually played by a trans actress who plays her voice. And I watched the preview for the show, and it actually looks really cool. I'm really excited for the show. I mean, it looks like a cool show even outside of being trans inclusive. But I'm going to play the audio for the promo here.
Cool.
They met as online gamers. Shona, a stand-up comic.
There's nothing like coming of age in a world where all the good Twitter names are gone because you were born too late, jobs are something you only see in 80s movies, and diet soda gives you diabetes.
Cameron, a poet.
I'm giving my answer in a free-form poem.
Make it a quick haiku.
It's a sacrifice, but I cannot live at home, so the answer is... shit.
Huey, a psychotic.
I ain't gonna pop you in the dick. Let me get this out of the way up top. I hate people.
And Betsy, fashion victim.
These are my Iggy Azaleas, and these are my Azalea Banks. Let's not confuse them, okay?
They're not Gen X. They don't want to be Gen Y, so they're moving in together and calling themselves Gen Z.
You've shown us more crappy apartments than Bill Cosby drug dates.
And it's the first animated show in the history of the world to feature a transgender actress in a lead role.
Whoa, you're trans?
You didn't know?
Being trans shows huge strength of mind. No pun intended, but it takes balls.
I'm thinking of replacing my balls with candy and turning the whole thing into a Pez dispenser.
Co-starring Jane Weedland.
That's beast!
And written and directed by Hayden Black, creator of the award-winning Goodnight Burbank, the first half-hour comedy to go from the web to TV. Alan, some people call this an intervention. I'd like to call it an intertransitional homosexual turnaround fiesta.
A train wreck, a troublemaker, a trans girl, and a trustafarian. And you thought The Breakfast Club was edgy.
Gen Z, a comedy about growing up and wondering why you bothered.
We're still having a party? Okay, let me just take another Oxy to calm my nerves. I don't want to get all Lana Del Rey before we hit the Depeche Road.
The party starts soon.
Huey, we're home.
The Pez dispenser joke. God.
I want to just say from the jump here that you were talking about how H&M made you feel kind of old because their clothes aren't marketed to you and you sort of don't get them.
Right.
Okay, hearing all the Twitter handles were taken because you were born too late. Yeah, that made me feel pretty ancient. And I think it's kind of interesting that kids were born up into that generation where the internet just has always been around, so that's a thing. But yeah, that's pretty badass. I'm one of those 30-somethings who never outgrew cartoons. I love cartoons, and this show looks pretty awesome.
Me too. I'm really excited for this show. And what I think is cool, because I was reading the article where they were, talking about this, and they were talking about the person who created it. And they asked him about, creating a trans character. And here's what he said. He said, I wanted to introduce a trans character and just show that she's human. We all have so much shit on our daily plates to deal with. And the other thing with Shona's character is that other people don't need your shit to add to their plate. Here's Shona, and what distinguishes her is not necessarily that she's trans, because she's a fun, funny, bright, charming individual. It just so happens that she's trans. That should have no meaning whatsoever. That's how I wanted to present her. I didn't want to create this titillating character where we explore sexuality. I mean, it's all in there, but we didn't want that to be all she's about. And I think that, I just think that's so cool because it goes back to what we were talking about in the last article about, moving towards portraying trans people as just being normal people.
Right.
And I think changing that perception is so important in a lot of ways. We talk a lot of times in some of the community organizations that I deal with about how, like, one of the most frustrating things about the problems that trans people face is that they're so basic. Like, trans people don't have unique needs. Like, we need healthcare, we need community support, we need love, we need intimacy. Like, we need the things that all other people need. It's not complicated.
Right, human things.
Hashtag human things.
Just human things. Yeah, I feel you on that. And that's something anyone who's known me for any amount of time knows, that I'm the first one to kind of get irritated when, you know, a new TV show or a new movie comes out that features a gay person, and the gay person is just the most blatant stereotype, and it gets really old when you feel like the only way you're ever represented in the media, you know, in entertainment, is just by this stereotype, because stereotypes don't help us understand anyone.
Right. It's usually like this, like, skinny, catty, girl jean wearing, like hyper, you know, over the top, like, quote unquote flaming, you know, gay person. And, like, that's how you know, like, oh, there's your token gay.
Right. And of course, you know, there are gay people like that, and that's fine. That's not a diss against them. But, you know, like we said before, stereotypes tell one story. They don't tell the whole story.
Right. It's about representing the diversity of the community.
Exactly. So, yeah, I think it's awesome that we have a cartoon of all things, which, you know, I'm excited about that features a trans person who's just a person. And, you know, everything doesn't have to be a trans joke or, you know, something like that. I think that's awesome, because there are the times when that happens with gay folks, like that movie Little Miss Sunshine. Did you see that?
I did, but it's been a while. Anyone
who hasn't seen that, I highly recommend it, because it's just an awesome show, an awesome movie. But Steve Carell plays a gay guy who really is the fact that he's gay is really just a detail of his character. It's you know, he's not a joke. He's not a walking punchline, and I really liked that about that movie. So I'm all about this.
And the other thing that's cool is I think that the guy that created the show, he spoke to the importance of having an actual trans person voice the character. And I think that's something that can get kind of missed by you know, people who don't necessarily, you know, see these things all the time. There was some uproar over the lead in Transparent not being played by a trans person, mm-hmm. and by Rayon from Dallas Buyers Club not being played by a trans person. And you know, it goes back to the idea of having positive cultural reference points, and how, you know, we need to see people like us in positions like that. Mm-hmm. It's easy to discount the importance of those things if that's something that you've never had to worry about. Is, you know, it's easy to internalize those things of, like, who you are as bad, because I don't see anyone like me around ever anywhere. Right. So what he said is, he said, I know we're in a very important place to create a character that may be a role model for other people. I just want to make sure this character is inspiring, and that's why there was no question we were going to have a trans actress voice the role. So, super positive media stuff. Like, I'm really excited about that. Obviously, you know, we all know that there are still some serious problems, but it is so cool to see stuff like this happening. And, you know, now, like, there's going to be a cartoon with someone who not only is a character I can relate to, but a person actually doing the voice that I can relate to, the actor actually doing the voice that I can relate to. And I'm excited for that.
Yeah, and I want to address something that's, I think, is kind of important, and that we're seeing a lot right now. When, if, say, in a movie or, you know, something like that, where there's a trans character that's played by a cisgender person, and a lot of the pushback that one side of the argument you'll hear about that is, well, they're actors, that's what they're supposed to do, act. So what's the big deal? And I want to say that to me the big deal is that there are trans actors out there looking for work. You know, if a trans role comes along, give it to a trans person. And again, this is something that, as the cultural tide shifts and changes, you know, we'll be able to maybe see this a little bit differently. But for now, I think it's probably really difficult for a lot of trans actors to get work playing cisgender characters. So why not give them the roles of trans characters when they come along? One of the other arguments I hear about that is, well, there probably just aren't enough trans actors to go along. And my boyfriend Derek actually said something to me that was really insightful when we were talking about this recently. He said, it's not that there aren't enough trans actors to go around. It's just that the amount of roles that a trans actor can fill are so small that it's probably turning a lot of trans people away from acting who otherwise would choose it as a career. So it's sort of a catch-22. If we don't make the roles available, then how are we going to, we can't complain that there aren't enough trans actors to play these roles. So
yeah, so I think it's super cool that the tide is kind of shifting on that one. So the next story is, the headline is, Trailblazing Publication Gives Guidance to Schools to Help Transgender Students. And I think this is really cool. So basically, these 5 national organizations who are LGBT focused made this super comprehensive guide to supporting trans kids in K through 12 schools, and to hand out to school administrations. And the idea is to provide an informative guide to help school officials as well as parents assist and encourage transgender students. The authors say that it contains legal information, research-supported guidance, and real-life narratives from students and educators spread over 6 chapters. It addresses basic concepts of gender, advice on approaching unsupportive parents, as well as information regarding the dangers of marginalization in school. And, this is another thing that, I just read this and I was like, oh my God, this is awesome.
Yeah, this was really unexpected. I was really surprised when I read this.
Well, and frankly, I have been kind of surprised in doing some of the work that I do with an organization called Glisten. One of the things that I'm doing is, I'm in training to mentor kids that want to run gay, straight, trans alliances at their schools. Mm-hmm. And obviously student-led organizations like that have to have the approval of the administration. And obviously, there have been groups who've run into pushback, but I've been shocked at how little of that pushback there has been and how open schools seem to want to be to have people from these organizations come and do education and professional development surrounding LGBT inclusion. So, being a trans or queer kid in school can be pretty miserable. But I think, something like this, that's such a huge paradigm shift. And if not necessarily this has absolutely made the situation better, but it's it's setting the stage to make that happen. And I think it's so cool that there's this such a big push to help kids, especially trans kids in school, figure out stuff like, bathrooms and names and pronouns and confidentiality and locker rooms and harassment and bullying and stuff like that. I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, there were two parts of this that I thought, the whole thing is amazing. 2 parts of it really stood out to me, that I thought were extremely important. The first one being that it has best practices for working with unsupportive parents.
Yes, that is huge.
That's huge. That's something that I don't think that we think about very often, is that trans kids growing up in families that are completely unsupportive, or worse. That leads to things like, the high rates of suicide that trans kids suffer. So I think it's awesome that they've included the conversation with unsupportive parents in there, and also the importance of gender identity and the harm society suffers when any students are marginalized at school, and just the way that's worded. This harms society. This isn't just a problem for trans people. It harms society when we marginalize kids. So I think that's extremely important and awesome.
Yeah, well, and that's one of the things that we talk about a lot is how, enumerated anti-bullying policies that cover things like gender expression and gender identity and sexual orientation, they're not just for queer and trans kids. There are lots of kids who aren't gay or trans but get bullied on some kids' perception that they might be.
I was one of those kids.
Yeah. So
I was obviously gay, but I didn't know that back then.
Right. Yeah, the only time I ever got bullied was for being fat, which sucked, but that's another story. So at the end of the day, I think this is a cool thing. Again, we'll have links in the show notes. It's really cool to see people stepping up to support trans kids because, it's sort of paradoxically a controversial thing. And I think it's cool that we're coming out so heavily in support of this. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about, and actually this will close this segment out here. So I ran across a poem that was posted in a BuzzFeed video. It's called "What If I Knew I Was Beautiful?" And it doesn't necessarily have anything to do specifically with being queer, being trans, being atheist, or anything like that. But it's just more about sort of the way society looks at women and, beauty standards and how we're supposed to view ourselves. And I found it very empowering. And, it's, and obviously, this is the good news episode, so we're trying to keep negativity to a minimum. But I mean, it does call out some of the negativity, but at the end of the day, I think it's super empowering, and it definitely, it definitely made me feel better. So I'm going to play that clip here.
You say I don't know I'm beautiful, but what if I did? You say I don't know I'm beautiful, but what if I did? Wouldn't you just call me a bitch? Wouldn't you say that I was stuck up or vain or some other kind of unnecessary bullshit? Wouldn't you try to cut my confidence down to half its size so that you could swoop in and tell me I don't know I'm beautiful? As if this was some sort of surprise? Well, I have news for you. I am not a parking ticket looking for your validation. Your songs filled with sweet nothings are no longer allowed to park for free. They're no longer allowed to cheapen my self-esteem. You say I don't know I'm beautiful, but what if I did? What if I looked in the mirror and actually liked what I saw? Makeup or no makeup, flaws and all. What if I woke up really feeling myself? And could post a selfie to Instagram without any self-doubt. No questions, contemplations, or hesitations, because the only person's confirmation I would need is my own. You say I don't know I'm beautiful, but what if I did? What if I accepted compliments at face value instead of constantly feeling the need to devalue myself for the sake of someone else? No, stop. You're just saying that to be nice. You're just saying that because you're my friend. If you've ever caught yourself saying these words, please take a moment and think again. Please take a moment to marvel at the radiance of your beauty, both on the outside and from within. Don't be afraid to be a woman who likes herself. There is no need to love your body with trepidation, because that bottomless pit of hesitation that you feel are only false expectations appearing real. So don't let your fear get the best of you, because every part of you is the best of you. And if that is a crime, if this just so happens to offend everyone else, I guess I'll be doing bad all by myself.
How freaking cool is that?
Yes, I love it.
I think it's so rare that we get messages like that as people in general, honestly, because, men get these messages too, in a lot of ways. They're sort of pointed in different directions and at different things sometimes, but, there's so much industry and there's so much money in us hating ourselves, and you can fix this horrible thing about you for just $19.95 plus $7.95 shipping.
God, I've got a joke about anytime I see a makeup ad, or these beauty product ads, I literally just see them saying, "You're ugly, we can fix you."
That's kind of what it is. You've got these horrible blackheads. You've got acne. Look at how terrible and ugly you are. But we have the solution for $19.95.
Yes, and then they show someone who's been airbrushed and has a yellow spotlight illuminating their face.
Right, obviously the left side is doctored to just look as terrible as possible. Like, you have to frown in this picture. We're going to smear paint all over your face and punch you 2 or 3 times. Yeah. And then and then on the other side, it's like, perfectly photoshopped makeup job, like perfect lighting, everyone's smiling, nice clothes. And, we joke, but like, that's a real thing. And I think it really sort of creates, vulnerability, in people. And the thing that I love about it is just a big, F you, middle finger in the face. Like, I don't have to not be confident in myself to be a good person. Like, I can love myself and I can think that I'm a beautiful person, and that's okay. Like, it doesn't have to be based on anyone's standards. And I think that's an important message. I think especially for trans people, but, for anyone in general. Yeah.
And I think it's such a paradoxical message that society sends to itself, where we tell people, especially girls and women, because that's just where our society is right now, that, you're beautiful. Don't feel too bad about yourself. But then when you have girls and women who sort of embody their own beauty and flaunt it, then we're telling them, okay, simmer down a little bit. You're not all that. Yeah. And it's almost kind of like a knee-jerk reaction that folks have whenever, when you see someone, we use words like, they're full of themselves, they're conceited. It's something I see a lot in men being in sort of the bear culture of the wider gay community, and that a lot of men.
Explain bear culture for just a minute, if you could.
Okay,
for people who may not know.
Bears are typically, there's a million definitions, but bears are typically gay men who are bigger, hairier. That seems to be a pretty good definition. Then, because I think the image a lot of folks have of gay men is this very metrosexual, slender, fashion forward, clean shaven sort of dude, and so a lot of bears have been denigrated by society their whole lives for the way they look, and so it's really cool for me when I see bears who, they're very body positive, and it's very easy to see stuff like that, like a video of a bear dancing with his shirt off, or just posting photos on Facebook that they're not even sexual in nature. They're just body positive type things, and people are like, "Oh, that's disgusting." They're so full of themselves? Why? What's their deal? And it's like, don't we want people to be okay in the bodies that they're in? I mean, that seems to me like something that seems like a good thing. So,
well, it's bad for capitalism if people are happy with themselves, because then they don't want to spend money on fixing it.
Yeah, that's very true. But I do want to let people know that, like you mentioned earlier, this definitely is a thing that men also experience, cisgender men experience, this notion of body positivity and sort of growing comfortable with their own bodies and not feeling so bad about them. So, I'd like to see more of that.
Yep. Bottom line is, you're beautiful, and you should own it.
Exactly.
And we're going to take a quick break here. We're going to be back with some listener-submitted stories on the Gaytheist Manifesto.
Here's an excerpt from Nailed by David Fitzgerald.
Didn't there have to have been a Jesus? Perhaps he was just a wandering teacher or an exorcist, an apocalyptic prophet or a zealot who opposed the Romans. Perhaps he was all these things, or even a composite of several such early first-century figures. But at any rate, surely there had to be somebody at the original core of Christianity, arguably the most famous individual in human history. All this seems to be a perfectly reasonable, completely natural assumption to make, so why would anyone be so foolish as to propose that Jesus never existed? Doesn't it just make more sense to assume that there was a historical Jesus, even if we're unable to recover the real facts about his life and death? As it turns out, no. The opposite is true. The closer we look at the evidence for Jesus, the less solid evidence we find, and the more we find suspicious silences and curious resemblances to the pagan and Jewish religious ideas and philosophies that preceded Christianity. And once you begin to parse out the origins of this tradition or that teaching from their various sources, the sweater begins unraveling quickly until it becomes very difficult to buy that there ever was, or even could have been, any historical figure at the center.
Nailed by David Fitzgerald is now available at atheistaudiobooks.com.
Before we jump back into the show, it's time to thank our patrons. This week we're recognizing Elsa. Thank you so much for believing in us enough to contribute to us financially and for being a part of this movement. Patrons of the Gaytheist Manifesto have access to all sorts of cool stuff, like a big shout out on the show, premium content, including an audio journal I've decided to keep documenting the more personal stuff I don't dive into on the show, and an exclusive patrons-only hangout once a month. If you're so inclined, head over to patreon.com/The Gaytheist Manifesto to become a part of this movement and support the show. Thank you. Welcome back to the Gaytheist Manifesto. Today's Good News Edition, Part 2. Because I'm French and cultured.
Good job.
Right, yeah. I'm flexing. You can't see it right now, but I'm flexing. So, for this segment, we've got some listener-submitted stories, both of, stuff in the news that they saw and sent to us, and some personal stuff. So, friend Victoria sent me an article. The title is just photos of gender non-conforming kids at summer camp. It's a very, very non-sensationalist headline. Actually, no, I lied.
That might have been the clickbaity, not clickbait, but the news, the headline that appeared in social media, but the actual headline is really cool.
Yeah, so 13 stunning photos reveal what happens when gender non-conforming kids have their own space. And so, to be clear, gender non-conforming is kind of a similar term of saying transgender. And, it's basically just, kids who are assigned one thing at birth that don't necessarily conform to what are considered to be the norms for that gender.
Or maybe just non-binary kids too?
Exactly. So you basically just stepping outside of whatever is expected of you based on being assigned male at birth or based on being assigned female at birth.
Right.
And so there's this camp that a couple of parents got together to create for their kids, for their gender nonconforming kids. And, one of the things that pictures of kids playing is awesome about, one of the things that's awesome about pictures of kids playing is you can tell, it's cool to see, kids who are, innocent and kind of carefree and they're just having fun and they're just being themselves. And what I think is really cool is to see these kids, in that mode. You see kids helping each other with their makeup or, doing their hair, running around in pretty princess dresses and, just being kids. There's one climbing a rock wall and these kids climbing over tires that are half buried in the ground. And, you see scraped knees and, just regular kid stuff. And, knowing what so many kids go through if their parents aren't affirming of them or if they're, scared to express that about themselves, knowing what that's like on the inside, seeing these pictures, it really, really warmed my heart. We'll put it that way.
Yeah, me too. Especially the photos are something so intimate and kind of immediate when you look at these photos because they're almost all very candid. It looks like only very few of them were sort of choreographed, but it makes me again think about how when we move out of the sort of intellectual concept of what it is to be a trans person or just a gender non-binary person, and move more into the embodied experience of it, seeing people, seeing these people, hearing their stories. There's something very interesting that happens, I think, in our hearts, because they begin to become real to us, I think. I think that's what it is. And these are just really beautiful photos, and it reminded me of how conservatives had sort of a collective freak out about about Target's decision to remove gender labeling from toys and bedding, and just seeing how people freak out about that, and what's the worst that could happen? That's what I ask people. If you see something, if you see a little boy who wants to put on a dress, or what's the worst what's going to happen? I mean, what's the terrible thing that you think is going to happen from that? And just sort of, examine your motives from there, because, these are kids just exploring what it is to be who they are, and who they feel that they are inside, and just wanting to express themselves. And I feel like that's the kind of society that I want, a society of people who aren't repressed and scared and kind of stifled. I want a society of people who feel free to be themselves and can express who they are, because we don't have all these strict rules on what you have to be.
Yeah, well, maybe in the good news stories we should have included the story of the guy who was trolling the crap out of the Target Facebook page.
Oh yeah, the Hope That Helps guy.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Well, going to that for a second. So, I was on a panel on the Thinking Atheist on Tuesday, and one thing that Zinnia Jones said that really, I don't know why I didn't think of it, because, when she said it, it was like, wow, that's really obvious. Like, if these, gender separations and gender norms are really that etched in stone, why does anyone have to enforce them?
Yeah, why do we need signs? Why would we need signs if they're that etched in stone?
So that was just that was something that she brought up that I thought was kind of poignant. But one of the quotes in this article that I really love, Lindsay Morris is the name of the photographer, and she's talking about what it was like shooting these photos and being around these kids, and she said this: "It's one thing to read about or hear a story, but it's quite another to hold the unfaltering gaze of the subject in a portrait, or to experience the poetic moments that happen in between the chaos, where in this case, we witness the children experiencing authenticity, some of them for the first time."
And that, that last part of that quote really comes through in some of these photos.
You think about that, experiencing authenticity for the first time in your life, feeling like those things match up and that things make sense. Frankly, in a lot of ways, I'm jealous of these kids because it took me till 28 to get there.
Yeah.
But like you said, it really comes through in seeing these pictures. They look so free and in some cases just normal. The kids helping each other doing their makeup. You can see there's this kid, helping another kid with their lipstick, and they're just super intent. I have to get this perfect, it's they're not even aware that this is a big deal because they're just being themselves. And, it's almost a sad commentary how awesome something that should be normal, while you're just being yourself, how excited we are about that. That is kind of a sad commentary. But to see kids have the opportunity to do this, I think it's awesome.
Yeah, me too. It's beautiful. The bit about experiencing authenticity is maybe a lot of us take that for granted. I do want to make a point about how amazing it really is when you experience that for the first time, because I can't speak for the trans experience, but I can say that being a gay guy, my entire life I felt that I was sort of a square peg trying to fit into a round hole when it came to, just the ins and outs of straight life, growing up in a family that was straight, in a society, in a school that really celebrated and almost kind of enforced straight values. When I first realized and then finally accepted that aspect of myself, which, you could say was experiencing my own authenticity for the first time, it really did feel just kind of I took off this ill-fitting jacket, and it was like a light bulb went off, and it was a really awesome moment. So, if these kids are getting to experience this at an even younger age, just imagine imagine who they'll grow into. Not feeling ashamed of themselves their entire life, but being able to accept themselves and celebrate themselves. Imagine what kind of people they'll grow into when they get older.
Yeah, we need more of those camps. Mm-hmm. So next up, we have one from Kristen. Kristen of the Mormons episode from a while ago.
Our friend Kristen.
Friend of the show and all-around awesome person, Kristen. So Kristen says, well, here in Virginia, I'm helping with a proposal to the state legislatures regarding equal health care access. Past proposals to legislatures have fallen on deaf ears because they were based around appeals to emotion and compassion. Our legislators are callous, black-hearted, and self-centered. Tell us how you really feel. I suggested we approach this in a new way. Instead of appeals to emotions, how about we reformat it into a public health issue? Public health addresses the health of entire communities rather than specific individuals. For example, if childhood obesity rates are going up in the state, public health workers devise plans to educate and promote healthy eating in the schools and to parents, which can be effective. In this case, we have a minority community who aren't getting their vaccines, aren't getting checkups, can't see a doctor, can't receive treatment for sickness, and are a major risk of spreading communicable diseases which pose a legitimate risk to the rest of the population, all through no fault of their own. By denying a minority the care they both need and want, it puts the rest of the population at greater risk. Through reformatting the proposal as a public health issue rather than a humanitarian issue, hopefully the legislators will see the wisdom in equal health care access. It seems like a good shot to take, and it looks like we're going to take that shot. And she adds, by the way, this is exactly the reason why I wanted to become a healthcare administrator, this specific issue. Well, so what's going to happen if it works before you even are out of school? What are you going to do then?
It's all downhill from here.
Right. Which is awesome. It sucks that the appeal to emotion and compassion didn't work because, I would hope that people would have emotion and compassion. But, I think framing it as a public health issue, I think that's perfectly legitimate.
That's what it is.
We are part of the public,
mm-hmm.
and there are many of us. So it would stand to reason that our health issues are community health issues. I think that's just sensible.
Yeah, and Kristen's awesome, but it also makes me feel really good to know that there are folks like her working behind the scenes to make things better for the LGBT community.
Yeah, I'm a fan of Kristen. So next we have Celeste, and Celeste says, for my own situation, I came out to work on June 1st. I was met with complete support and acceptance. I work at a college as a student web developer, and I have been there for over 3 years. I even have a trans pride flag on the wall of my shared office now. Since the school is a great environment, I decided to finally jump in headfirst and go full-time as Celeste this Monday, the 17th.
Yay.
Which, congratulations. That's awesome.
Yeah.
My coworkers have been calling me Celeste since June and using the proper pronouns to boot, even though I've been in boy mode. I've emailed 2 of my 3 professors, and they were both accepting of me. The other professor is a trans woman as well, and I've been talking to her since the beginning of the summer. I feel completely safe going to my school as myself, and I could not be happier. And then she moves on to talk about an organization that she works with called the Gender Initiative. She says the Gender Initiative was actually started last year. It had no name, and it was originally ran by another trans student, a gender fluid person, and an all-around amazing person. I first went to the student organization in January, and I knew no one else who was trans and was completely in my introverted bubble. The people I met there really helped me through accepting myself. Unfortunately, the original founder left the school, so the group was not going to be continued. I decided to step up and take leadership, and I am currently in the process of getting it set up. Freaking go you.
Yeah.
That's awesome. On a personal level and on an activism helping community level. That's awesome on both levels.
Yeah, I wanted to say, first of all, congratulations, and we celebrate this moment with you, Celeste. But Celeste also said something that really struck me toward the end, where she said, I feel completely safe going to my school as myself and could not be happier. So I want folks to know that this happened. All it took from people for this to happen was just to say, oh, you're Celeste? Okay, cool. Oh, you want to go by she and her and hers pronouns? cool, I can do that. Cost them nothing. And this is the result. You know, it made her coming out experience super positive, and as she said, she's very happy now. And you know, it costs us nothing to make that happen. So,
well, yeah, and I mean that's the thing that I say often about my own story is, you know, there are lots of ways in which I'm pretty privileged for a trans person. You know, I mean, I have a decent middle class job where I make, you know, I mean, I'm not like rolling in money or anything like that, but I do okay, and I mean, I've got enough money to pay the bills and stuff. But, you know, I mean, if there's any, you know, broader message to my story, it's that when a trans person gets the support, the care and stuff that they need, like, they can flourish just as well as anyone else.
Yeah, and that's the whole point, isn't it? I mean, just all humans need support and acceptance and love, and that's really all this is.
And so Angel, without breaching privacy, I'm just going to say, Angel, if you're listening, I love you. You are very special to me. I want you to know that. So 2 days ago, I went back to school. After the day was over, I had to stick around for a few hours. Luckily, my friend was stuck there too, so we talked, and during that long conversation, I found out she broke up with her horrifyingly homophobic boyfriend. I don't remember how the conversation got to this point, but we got to the topic of crushes as high school kids do, but she framed the question as, are there any girls, followed by an awkward pause, or guys that you like? I knew at that point my cover was blown, and it was too late to ask her to ignore the bisexual behind the curtain, so I came clean. This was my first time coming out to someone I'm not close to, and I imagined it being so dramatic, but she was so quick to accept me and move on. It didn't stop there. She told me that one of my other friends is bi, another is a lesbian, and another is polyamorous. I don't know if those people would be okay with being outed, but I know that I'm not alone as I thought now. And yeah, we definitely shouldn't out other people without their knowledge or consent. But it is super cool that that you feel less alone. And I hear more and more coming out experiences like that, where you come out and you say, I'm gay, I'm bi, I'm trans, whatever, and it's like, oh, okay, so like you're gonna be coming home with dudes now instead of girls. Like, okay. You know, and it's just it's exactly that big of a deal. And you know, it definitely doesn't happen as often as it should, but it's so cool to hear stories like that. And you know, to hear stories, I mean, frankly, kind of more like mine, where you know, even the people who sort of struggled with it for the most part were like, look, you know, any struggles that I have are my problem, not yours. You need to do what you need to be happy, and if this is what that is, then do that thing, and I'll figure it out, and I'll be there with you along the way. So I think that's a really cool story.
Yeah. Congratulations, Angel. And to tie this back to one of the stories we were talking about earlier, with the cartoon that has the trans character, and when we were talking about trans visibility and really visibility in general for, you know, anyone along the LGBT spectrum, that's why this is important for you know, first of all, it puts that sort of thing into public consciousness, but it also, you know, feelings of loneliness are very prevalent among LGBT kids. I imagine with trans kids and not gender non-binary kids, that's probably even more intensified because, you know, there's so much fewer of them. So that's why that's important. And I love hearing stories of when someone says, you know, someone told me, I came out to someone and they told me, oh yeah, you know, I have my uncle is gay, or, you know, I have this gay friend or this friend who's trans, and that helps them to realize that they're not alone. It can feel very lonely because you don't see yourself being represented in public media, and, you know, you don't have a lot of people around you who can relate to you. So these sort of things are really cool to hear.
And Jeremiah, our good friend Jeremiah, the prophet Jeremiah from No Religion Required. Oh yeah, I feel like I always have to introduce him that way.
I think so.
This is Jeremiah, the prophet Jeremiah.
Jeremiah is awesome.
He really is. And No Religion Required is God, I can't talk. No Religion Required is a great show.
Yeah, check it out. It's really cool.
This isn't particularly LGBT related, but as secularists, this is news I think a lot of Gaytheist listeners, in parentheses says Gaytheisters, Which, if we start a fan club, that's what we're going to call it, I think. Gaytheists. But this is news I think a lot of Gaytheist listeners could appreciate. For those who don't know, in 2009, the Colorado Family Planning Initiative provided free IUDs and long-acting reversible contraceptive devices for little to no cost. Between 2009 and 2015, the Colorado Department of Public Health reported that the birth rate among teens plummeted 40% and abortions 42%.
Mm-hmm.
This intersects a lot with poverty as well. Quoting the New York Times, in 2009, half of all first births to women in the poorest areas of the state happened before they turned 21. By 2014, half of first births did not occur until the women had turned 24, a difference that advocates say gives young women time to finish their educations and to gain a foothold in an increasingly competitive job market. As a relatively new resident to Colorado, this is excellent news. As skeptics, I think this is strong evidence that we can use in our fight for comprehensive women's health care. If you're ever confronted with anti-choice advocates who state that they want to reduce abortion, this is something to show them. Birth control is not just a luxury or a gateway to consequence-free sex, as if sex should have consequences, but it is a necessary part of healthcare that everyone should have access to.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't see me, but I'm like fist pumping.
Yeah, and it's so amazing that it seems like a no-brainer, but there are still people who fight against this.
Like, I mean, it really is logical. Like, if you give women birth control, they're probably going to get pregnant less.
Yeah, teach kids what sex is and how to have it safely, and we don't have to make sex a taboo, because all that does is it results, as we know, the science shows, when you make all this stuff a taboo and a mystery and just keep kids from it and teach them just not to have sex. What happens? They go and have sex. They don't know what they're doing. They get diseases. They get pregnant as teenagers. And I mean, come on, this is a no-brainer.
Yeah, and I'm 100% pro-choice, but I mean, I think we can probably all agree that we'd like abortion to be necessary less.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. We're pro-choice. It doesn't mean we're pro-abortion. I don't delight in women having abortions, because that seems like it's at best pretty inconvenient, and maybe sometimes it can be kind of scary and traumatic. But
and painful too. I mean, I've heard a lot of women describe, their abortions. They say like, I don't regret having an abortion, but it was not a pleasant experience.
No, it does not sound like something you'd go to do for just for.
Let's go to the clinic. It's going to be sweet.
Let's go get an abortion. But yeah, I'm not pro-abortion, but I'm an advocate for women having accessible and affordable health care, and for us to be educating people on these things. And that leads to, surprise, fewer abortions, fewer teen pregnancies, safer kids in general. So,
and less poverty, ultimately.
And less poverty, yeah.
So we're going to take a quick break here. We're going to come back with Be a Better Ally on the Gaytheist Manifesto.
Hi, Callie and Daniel. I'm Demanda Wright.
And I'm Miss B. Haven, and we're promoting secular feminism.
Find us at facebook.com/promoting secular feminism and Twitter @secular feminism.
We're keeping the diviners out of your vaginas.
And keeping the hoodoo out of your hoo-ha.
Here's an excerpt from Callie's audio journal, produced exclusively for patrons of the Gaytheist Manifesto.
Coming to terms with who I really am and learning not just to be okay with it, but to love and embrace it is a kind of freedom I've never known in my life before. I spent time touring the country in a band, and that's almost the ultimate freedom. You, your best friends, the road, the next show, fans, record labels, all that sort of stuff. I got to live a dream that many people have, but few people ever get to actually accomplish. And those are some of my favorite memories. But I was still not quite myself then. Secrets are toxic, or at least they can be. Obviously, you don't want to always share every part of your life with everyone, but there are certain things that eat at you. My being trans ate at me. It was kind of my own private self.
For access to this and more, join the movement. Go to patreon.com/the Gaytheist Manifesto to learn more.
Today in school, I learned a lot. In chemistry, I learned that no one likes me. In English, I learned that I'm disgusting. And in physics, I learned that I'm a loser.
Today in school, I learned that I'm ugly and useless. And in gym, I learned that I'm pathetic and a joke. In history, I learned that I'm trash.
Today in school, I learned that I have no friends. In English, I learned that I make people sick. And at lunch, I learned that I sit on my own because I smell. In chemistry, I learned that no one likes me.
In biology, I learned that I'm fat and stupid. And in math, I learned that I'm trash.
The only thing I didn't learn in school today?
The only thing I didn't learn today?
The only thing I didn't learn?
Is why no one ever helps.
Kids witness bullying every day. They want to help, but they don't know how. Teach them how to stop bullying and be more than a bystander at stopbullying.gov.
Welcome back to the show. Today we are talking about good news. It's good news part 2, because I'm French and cultured, as mentioned before.
Deux.
Deux. D-E-U-X. Deux. So in this week's Be a Better Ally segment, what I kind of wanted to talk about was how the way that we kind of frame the narrative around stories about queer and trans people, and even about atheists too, I think. A lot of times we see even people who are very pro-gay, very pro-trans, repeating these awful stories about bad things that happen, conservatives being awful because that's what they do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not to say that shouldn't happen. Like, obviously we don't want to ignore those stories because those stories happen and it's important to know those things are going on. But my whole point, I think, with this is to kind of say, like, let's be cognizant of how much we're beating our queer and trans friends over the head with how awful it can be sometimes.
Yeah, I agree.
And this goes back to, that the debate over, trigger warnings and content notices and all that kind of stuff. There are people who have experienced actual violence and vitriolic hatred surrounding these things, and those people probably don't want to see stories like that plastered all over Facebook all the time. And you'll probably not hear a person among them say that these things shouldn't be talked about or that they're not important. But I think it's also important to not, like I said, to not beat everyone over the head with all this. Like, oh, look at this stupid thing that Mike Huckabee said now. Well, there's a shock. Mike Huckabee said something stupid.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. These things are happening, but they're not the only things that are happening. And I think that, you and I were having this conversation a couple nights ago where there's a really fine line that we as allies and as activists walk when we're trying to, show the world that these are things that are happening and they're important, but without, sort of just exhausting everyone around us who's listening. Because we've, some of us, and I say some of us meaning, some of you guys, as well as Callie and I, we've been in this for a long time. So, we're kind of used to it, but folks who are, that maybe this is new to them or they're just sort of, entering into this realm, they need a gentler approach, I think, and they need some reprieves every once in a while from all the bad news. So something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I think the importance of safe spaces is something that can't be underestimated. You can make sure that that your friend that you're a safe space for your friends, and I don't know. Because, like I said, this runs dangerously close to saying, like, you have to, mother hen and protect your queer and trans friends from all the bad things that are happening outside.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not really what I'm saying. I know, like, for me, for example, I mean, as strange as it may sound for how outspoken and opinionated I am, is I'm actually a super sensitive person. Like, when people say and do the right things, it's really not tough for people to hurt my feelings and, like, for people to hurt me in serious ways. Like, the point where I'm just done for the day and, like, I can't get out of bed or something, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And, for me, I know, like, scrolling through Facebook and I just, every other story is well, another trans woman murdered, another trans woman murdered, another trans woman murdered.
Yeah.
And
now there's a counter.
Well, of course there is, because how else are you going to keep track?
Yeah.
And at the risk of saying the same thing over and over again, I just, where do we draw the line? I mean, what do you think about where do we draw the line there between, this thing happened and it's really bad and we have to let people know that this bad thing happened, versus like, wow, do I need to be another voice throwing this out there to talk about this? Like, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Like, how do we navigate that?
I think that we need to be, I think it helps to sort of pay attention to what everyone else is saying. I mean, sometimes there are stories I read on Facebook that I want to share, but then I realize that everyone is sharing the story. So, maybe this is something that I don't need to talk about as much. But I think it's good to, in addition to having a finger on the pulse of what's going on in these communities, to also to see some of the things that are happening that are good. And, I want to hear about LGBT folks who are changing the world and who are making a difference in their communities. I want to hear about atheists who are making a difference in their communities and who are making the world a better place. I want to hear stories. I want to hear people, telling the world who they are and how they experience the world. I'd like to hear those things too, not just, as atheists, we want to hear about the victories that we have when it comes to something like, religious harm being the norm, and then, the Supreme Court, shuts them down in some way. That's awesome news. And we also need to know when the opposite of that is happening, because it's important to know what's going on. But I think that it's good to also know that good things are happening, and they're not just happening in the Supreme Court. They're not just happening, in the legal system, that they're happening from individual folks and even groups of folks that probably aren't getting a lot of attention.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. So I guess the point is to just kind of maybe try and balance, the message that you're sending. Just pay attention to, is literally everything that I'm sharing bad news? Like, I think positivity is something that's super important, and that's why we do, that's why we do these good news episodes, and that's why, hopefully they'll become more regular, because, I had a friend who told me she downloads my show every week, but that she doesn't always listen because sometimes the topics are a little too heavy.
Mm-hmm.
And, she's a social worker. She does, she does work with people who are in very, very bad places because they're trans, because they're queer, kids who are, just in a really bad way. And she's like, not exactly the kind of thing that I necessarily want to listen to when I'm at home trying to relax. And like, I can't blame her for that, because the show does get pretty heavy sometimes, and it's especially been that way the past couple of weeks. So I do think it's important to, to analyze our role in that too.
Yeah.
And to occasionally say, like, there are amazing things happening. There are good people doing good things, making a difference. And, that, if you allow us to get up out from under all of this stuff, we can thrive, we can flourish, we can be just like anyone else. And I think that may be the most important message of all.
I think so too.
Well, that, my friends, is going to do it for this good news edition of the Gaytheist Manifesto on Secular Media Network. I want to thank my co-host Daniel.
My pleasure.
And thank you again for all the listeners that submitted stories. We're doing, more listener generated content in these last few episodes, and having people, step out to submit stuff is cool. So please continue doing that. So, you can find the show on Facebook at facebook.com/The Gaytheist Manifesto. You can email us at thegaytheistmanifesto@gmail.com. I am on Twitter at GaytheistCali.
And I'm on Twitter at Daniel Wolfsong.
And you can find the show on Twitter at The Gaytheists. Before we go, I want you to know that if you're lost, you're hurting, you're scared, if you feel like no one cares and no one understands, You need to know there's a community out here that loves you, cares for you, and knows that you're capable of amazing things and that you are worthy of love. If you're struggling, please don't be afraid to reach out. Until next time, friends, this is the Gaytheist Manifesto.